Hi, I'm Glenn Fox, and let's talk about the structure and function of the digestive system. In this video, we'll outline the major structures and functions of the gastrointestinal system, the regions of the GI system, the layers and features of the gut tube wall, and the basic processes of digestion. So the digestive system is a fancy tube with a few accessory organs. We refer to it as the gastrointestinal tract, or the GIT for short. And a perfect synonym for this is the digestive tract, the alimentary canal, the gut tube, and so on and so forth. So I think of this as a rose by any other name, still smelling as sweet. I want you to consider that your body is like a donut, and the empty space through the digestive tract is that donut hole. So we can start up at the mouth and we end at the anus, and everything in between is hollow. So we can follow those tubes all the way through, and everything that I've just outlined there is empty space and is therefore outside of the body. So anything in contact with that lumen or that donut hole is going to be superficial. And as we absorb materials through the wall, they're entering into our body. So the croissant that you ate for breakfast or the hummus for lunch, until you absorb those nutrients, they are still outside of your body. You're just carrying them around. We can organize the digestive system into the upper gastrointestinal tract and the lower gastrointestinal tract. The upper tract begins with the mouth. We go through the oral cavity, through the pharynx or the throat, down the esophagus, through the stomach, and part of the way through the duodenum, which is the proximal portion of the small intestine. It's at this point that we break. And this is going to be the division between the foregut and the midgut. The lower gastrointestinal tract picks up in the duodenum, that second part of the duodenum, and it continues through the remainder of the small intestine and the large intestine, and all the way through to the anus. Now there are accessory organs of digestion. Some are associated with the oral cavity, as we'll discuss. Some are predominantly anatomically associated with the foregut, but their actions functionally are going to begin in the midgut. And this will make complete sense to you when we discuss the biliary tract. The majority of these organs, so starting from the distal esophagus, all the way down through and including the rectum, are in a space known as the abdominopelvic cavity. So for the purposes of the digestive system, this is where most of the magic is happening. To facilitate ease of communication, we can break down that abdominopelvic cavity a number of ways. The most simple of ways is into 4 abdominal quadrants. So this is a way in which we can discuss the location of viscera, where pain is felt, so on and so forth. So we have a right upper quadrant, oftentimes just called the RUQ, the left upper quadrant, as you might guess this system, the LUQ, a left lower quadrant, an LLQ, and a right lower quadrant, the RLQ. These quadrants are prescribed by the intersection of 2 planes. The first being the median plane, which is right down the middle of the organism. And the other is the transumbilical plane. So trans across umbilical. Think of where your belly button or your umbilicus is. Draw a line across there. And that intersection, if we think of it going posteriorly, is going to intersect with the intervertebral disc of the 3rd and the fourth lumbar vertebra. So this is how we will have these quadrants established. Now let's take a moment and discuss the gut tube wall. There are going to be 4 basic layers, and these layers are going to have a lot to do with the function of the gut tube. So the most superficial of layers, recall the superficialist of all the layers begins in the lumen of the gastrointestinal tract, is known as the mucosa. And the mucosa has 3 basic layers to it. The first is the endothelium, which is an epithelial layer. Remember, those cover and or line. In this case, it's endothelium, so it is lining. This is simple squamous epithelium, and it will have associated glands with it. These glands are for secretion. The next deeper layer is the lamina propria. The lamina propria is loose connective tissue. It's areolar connective tissue that is hosting capillary beds for the secretion and reabsorption of materials from the cardiovascular system, as well as lymphatic tissue. Specifically, it's mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue, or MALT for short. And then the deepest layer of the mucosa is a little bit of smooth muscle. We call this the muscularis mucosae. And we see that this has its orientation longitudinally. Deep to the mucosa is a rather important layer. They're all important, but a layer near to my heart, the submucosa. The submucosa is where the bulk of the neurovasculature, so nervous tissue and blood vessels, are found. So arteries and veins that are responsible for feeding into and draining those capillary beds are going to be very heavily distributed in this submucosa. There's also an important nervous structure called the submucosal plexus, oftentimes referred to as Meissner's plexus. This is under autonomic control, or very technically controlled by the enteric nervous system, which controls the gut tube. And specifically, this submucosal plexus is going to help regulate 2 major things. The first is going to be the secretion of glands in the mucosa, and the second is going to be the flow of blood in the submucosa. In addition, we have lymphatic tissue. This lymphatic tissue is connecting with that mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue in the lamina propria. Any time that we have exchange of materials through the cardiovascular system, we're also going to have some lymphatic tissue surrounding as well. Now, if we go even deeper, we go into kind of the meat, no pun intended, of the gut tube wall, and that's the muscularis. The muscularis consists largely of smooth muscle tissue. So smooth muscle tissue is under autonomic, or in this case, enteric control. And there are generally 2 distinct layers of this muscularis, although in certain organs we can have elaborations of this whereby we can have even more layers. But the 2 layers are a longitudinal layer, and this happens to be the deeper of the 2 layers, and a circular layer. And so these 2 differently oriented layers of smooth muscle are going to be responsible for 2 distinct types of motion of materials through the lumen. So there's going to be both peristalsis, which is wave-like contractions, complements of the longitudinal layer, and then segmentation. Segmentation is when areas are squeezed, and this is going to be complements of that circular layer of smooth muscle tissue. Within the muscularis is the myenteric plexus, oftentimes referred to as Auerbach's plexus. And the myenteric plexus is responsible for control of these smooth muscles. So whether or not materials are being propelled through or churned within the gut tube is being decided by this plexus. And then the most deep layer of the gut tube wall is known as the serosa, or the serosal layer. The serosa is visceral peritoneum. So that is a layer of, specific layer of a serosal membrane that is attached to the gut tube wall as an organ. And very frequently we'll refer to this as a mesentery, as we'll discuss. Let's take a moment to discuss the physiology or the functions of the digestive system, of which there are 6 basic processes. The first being ingestion. So I'm not talking about any particular individual, just individuals generally. Your average bear off the street is going to consume between 3 to 4 liters of water daily and about 2,000 to 3,000 calories. Sometimes more, sometimes fewer, and depending on the individual, this can be quite healthy in either direction. Next, secretion. So the average individual is going to secrete about 7 liters worth of various fluids, acids, bases, buffers, digestive enzymes into the lumen of the GI tract to mix with all of the foodstuffs and what those foodstuffs become, so that we can break down those materials in a subsequent process. There's also mixing and propulsion. So complements of the muscularis, we have both peristaltic or wave-like motions and segmental or sort of churning contractions of the gut tube wall. And then, sort of the reason for being, we have the processes of digestion. Digestion may either be mechanical and physical, so think of like your teeth, breaking down foodstuffs in the mouth, or think of the stomach churning, or it may also be chemical. So some of the glands within the wall of the gut tube can secrete various enzymes or acids to break down materials into small enough portions that they may be absorbed, so that is the next process, through the wall of the gut tube and into the body. This process of absorption is greatly aided by our microbiome. The microbiome is the sum total of microorganisms that call the inside of our gut tract home. When most people think of microorganisms, they think of pathogens, but most of these are mutually associated organisms that provide value added for us. They boost our immune systems. They produce vital nutrients that we don't otherwise get in our diet, and they help us to absorb these through the wall of our gut tube. And as all good things must come to an end, so must the functions and the anatomy of the digestive system. So our final process is that of defecation or elimination. Anything that is not absorbed across the gut tube is condensed and dehydrated largely as feces, which is then expelled from the inside of the lumen to far outside the body. So we've discussed the major organization and functions of the digestive system, the regions of the GI system, the layers of the gut tube wall and their functions, as well as the 6 basic processes of digestion. Thank you so much for your time.